This is Ben Mattlin, and I'll give you a brief reminder of who he is. You may have read this on the event description already, but um, Ben Mattlin is his latest book is called Disability Pride: Dispatches from a Post-ADA World, and he is a journalist, essayist, and author. He was born with spinal muscular atrophy. Um, Congenital muscle weakness. He has been a lifelong wheelchair user, and his other books include Miracle Boy Grows Up and In Sickness and in Health. He has appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, USA Today, and Vox, as well as on NPR. And without any further ado, I'll let Ben take over, and we'll have a question and answer portion at the end, or you can post questions in the chat, or those on Facebook can post questions in the comments.
Great.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank everyone for showing up. I'd like to say it's great to be back in Massachusetts, virtually. Anyway, let me start though by kind of describing myself for those who can't see very well. I'm an old white guy with not enough graying hair, wearing glasses and a red and white striped shirt, blue jacket, dark blue blazer. I have a headset microphone, and the background is a bookshelf and assorted mess. I've been learning to do that, to describe myself, because access isn't just about ramps, and elevators and things. There's all kinds, and it's important, I think, to be as accessible as possible. I hope in this recording is done that there'll be closed captioning and such. Always a help. Oh, good.
I turned on the captions. I realized I forgot to put those on. I'm not sure how great they are, but they're at least something.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I began my latest book, which will be out in paperback in November, Disability Pride, because about 5 years ago, I began to notice something was happening. A giant billboard in Times Square for Olay, the beauty products company, featured a rising model named Jillian Mercado, who has a neuromuscular disability, like me. Around the same time, Aerie, the lingerie company, did a whole catalog with models with prosthetic limbs and colostomy pouches and scars and all sorts of disabilities and chronic illnesses fully visible. A year later, a paraplegic performer wins a Tony Award for starring role in Oklahoma, a role that, as far as I know, had never been played by a disabled performer. I'm 60 years old. I remember the world before the ADA, remember it quite well, but after it passed, or not long after, my wife and I had a couple of kids, and I got involved in domestic life and my other career. I got away from disability activism. and really from the disability community. And I realized that the new generation of disabled folks, were doing things that I dare say my generation never imagined. And we talked about disability rights and access to employment and public spaces and so forth. Uh, but fashion models, singers, performers, awards, it had gone much farther than I'd ever imagined. And I realized I had lost touch with my community, disability community, and I didn't know how we had gotten to this point. So I went back to connect the dots, basically, to understand what had been happening since the ADA passed. My whole generation, been 30 years, a whole generation had come of age. And what they had been doing with the rights, I guess you'd say, the seeds that my generation and the one before me had planted was really quite astounding. But I didn't understand it all. So I did my research. And I think the most important part for me was talking to as many or emailing or whatever, communicating with as many folks, uh, disabled folks, folks with chronic health conditions, uh, preferably the younger, under age 40, say, but as many as I could. And where I couldn't connect with somebody personally, I would read up on what they'd been blogging and articles and other interviews they'd done. And it was important in this book for me to step back, so to speak, to be a journalist and provide space for these other folks to explain themselves in their own words, in their own way. Now, obviously, I'm not entirely objective on the subject. I say journalist, but I understood what I was hearing. I think from my perspective as a disabled person, and I learned a lot. Uh, I thought I understood kind of what disabled people wanted, uh, what activism was all about, and I was wrong. I had a lot to learn about my own community and about what the sort of new 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 idea of fairness and justice was all about. Uh, there are a lot of aspects of the disability community, disability history that I didn't know because, they've been sort of made invisible or erased from the mainstream record, particularly uh, disabled people of color, uh, queer, trans, disabled people, uh, heck, disabled women. I mean, so much of what I knew, I hadn't thought about it before, but was, white men in wheelchairs like me. And I never thought about mental health issues, psychiatric, cognitive disabilities, neurodiversity. I mean, we're a pretty big tent, disabled community, disability community. And I feel that once you understand that, once you know a bit more about the history and the diversity, uh, you I, as a disabled person, can begin to feel better about myself too. This knowledge helped engender feelings of disability pride. Now, I had, from the beginning, I was interested in this idea of disability pride, which is, where the title comes from, because I thought, here are these young models and performers who are not ashamed of their physical attributes or the way they present themselves to the world. They have guts, I don't know, self-confidence, moxie, something. Uh, where did that come from? How did they get that? I never thought about it, but when I did, I realized, yeah, I've struggled with it. I've gone through times that I've tried to hide my disability, which is sort of impossible, pretty darn obvious. I've tried to minimize my limitations, and why? Uh, as I interviewed people, I asked them about this, and I would say every single person had a story to tell about how they had been ashamed or felt uncomfortable about their own bodies and the journeys they'd been on to feel okay with themselves as they were, and how it helped when they connected with other folks like themselves, and when they understood the roots of some of that uh, shame coming from, without, from a society that celebrates certain norms, uh, and can make you feel bad if you vary from that norm in any way. Uh, so anyway, it's a long roundabout way of explaining kind of what was behind my book and what it taught me. And I hope as people read it, they too will gain a similar understanding of the community, the history, the issues, but also what it means to feel disability pride. Yeah, I catch my breath. Any questions or anything I can address?
Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to post them in the chat or switch off your microphone and ask. Does anyone?
Hmm.
I think all of you are muted. Do you know how to unmute yourselves? Otherwise, I'll keep an eye on the chat. Um,
Hmm.
thought some of you would have something. I'll see if anyone on Facebook has. Just have to keep switching between things. So let's see.
Oh, I can
People
ramble on.
people are watching on Facebook.
Good.
Let's see. All right. Well, if no one has any specific questions, I guess I mean, I can just ask if there are any sort of specific people who particularly stood out to you, or that you'd like to highlight just
Huh.
as an introduction to the book.
Yeah, I hate to, highlight someone and leave someone else out. But
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
oh, Jim just unmuted himself. Jim, did you have a question? Uh, oh, he's connecting to audio. Okay, so we might see if Jim has a question here, because he just unmuted himself. Hello, Jim. So did you have a question? It still says connecting to audio. Maybe everyone's having audio issues. I hope not.
hmm, well, I can
Yeah,
fill
I
the
mean, I don't want
silence.
you. Yeah, I don't want you to sort of feel like you're highlighting someone at the expense of.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, uh, there's so many folks, past and present, uh, who struggled against prejudices and uh, difficulties, and uh, it's it's nice to know that they existed. My first book, Miracle Boy Grows Up, was basically a memoir. I won't say autobiography exactly. Uh, but people always ask me about myself. I think every disabled person has heard this. And you're amazing. How did you do such and such? I got tired of answering those questions. So I thought I'd set the record straight. Uh, but I also knew even then that what can happen when one disabled person tells life story, they can be judged exceptional or inspirational. And that was the last thing I wanted. So I had this idea to interweave my life story with the birth of the disability rights movement as I understood it then, because I had directly benefited. I mean, I got sort of involved at the tail end of it, but I was a great beneficiary of the activists that come before me. Um, as I say, this new book is entirely different. I'm hardly in it at all. I was really trying to shift the attention to the community out there. Uh, it can be a problem that people sometimes take disability stories as, yeah, inspirational, and it's amazing, and people still think that uh, disability rights, ramps and sign language and on, is about being nice and charitable, and that's not really the point. It's you know, it's about civil rights. Um, there is a newish wrinkle in that effort. Started, well, actually 15, 20 years ago. Uh, so the second wave of disability activism called disability justice, which a lot of people, I think, misunderstand. I misunderstood it at first. I thought it was just a cool, term. Uh, I'm not totally appropriate to describe it because it's not about people like me. It's about uh, fairness and justice for the most marginalized disabled folks who have not really had a seat at the table. It's about really reinventing society to be more fair to all types of people. Um, the ADA and civil rights is great and all, but it only goes so far. And disability justice folks have pointed out how many of the people killed by law enforcement officers are disabled folks, folks who are unable to hear or to process commands to freeze, whose behavior is misinterpreted, and through no fault of their own, they're killed or incarcerated. There's that kind of unfairness that goes beyond access to employment or access to theaters and shopping malls. So there are a lot of issues that I was not really aware of. It has a new generation, a new strain of activism, a new framework for thinking about what an accessible society would be like. It's to me, it's thought provoking, and it gives me hope because when I went in to researching this book, I confess I had a fear that the new generation had grown complacent. That my peers and predecessors had gotten disability rights through the system with ADA, and everybody after that was just resting on their laurels. Not so, not so. So it was, to me, very hopeful to find out about all these activist folks all over the world who are doing things to move the cause along. Now we must have lots of questions, right? Well, I'll take a sip of drink and prattle on. But a sip, please. Man, this is great. Everybody's muted but me. I've never had examples of disability justice successes. Let me think a second. Thank you. Uh, disability justice. I don't know. Only success I can think of is a sort of greater awareness. I know some of the folks who started the idea get kind of miffed that it's been appropriated by the whole group. I mean, they make a distinction between disability rights and disability justice. And my understanding, disability justice is visionary, if you will, so far ahead that it's really hard to to call anything a success in that regard. I mean, there are movements to recognize uh, greater diversity in terms of what counts as accessible. So, for instance, for autistic people, there's a movement. There's a woman in Europe I interviewed for the book who's trying to do a kind of a universal design, architectural design for autistic people, where the transitions from room to room are sort of subtler, I guess, easier to transition, uh, as well as noise reduction and lighting issues. And, uh, so there are definitely ways I think that uh, more types of disabled people and access issues, more than ramps and braille, uh, are being recognized and instituted. But wow, there's a long way to go. Not a great answer to your question, I'm afraid, but that's the
I think
nature of
you
activism.
I think you highlighted some people and some achievements. So,
Mhm.
would you want to introduce any of the people who you talked to in Disability Pride, just um, to name some individuals and what they've been up to?
Uh, that gets me nervous because I'll leave somebody out or I won't do them justice.
Well,
Uh,
this is
I will say, uh, I suppose I'm talking about myself again. Uh, my first book came out 10, 11 years ago, and I have been trying for years and years. In recent years, however, a lot more books have come out by and for and about disabled folks, by disabled folks, not by clinicians or, you know, uh, somebody imagining it, but actual disabled folks. I could highlight some of the authors of late that I just, it's great they're out there. I'm sure I would leave people out. I mean, an obvious one is Alice Wong, who has a huge following. Uh, Sammy
right.
Shark, a professor on race and disability. Uh, uh, I, I could go on and on. Uh, there are a lot of good books out there. There's a guy
Yeah,
named Leroy Moore Jr. who's getting a PhD at UCLA. He's a scholar on Black disabled folks in music who've been overlooked. He started something called, or co-founded, uh, Hip Hop Nation. He knows more about musical history than I could ever imagine. God, there's so many scholars and creative folks, and um, people who write about society in just ways that, to me, it's ways I've never thought of. Um, but again, I'm kind of afraid to single people out.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I think it does you credit. I was just more thinking of, these are the some people I talk about are there many more.
Hmm. Hmm.
I appreciate that you're talking more about larger issues, but I think um, sometimes it might help just to have some particular individuals. Um, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's okay. But you've mentioned a few. Allie's
Okay.
built her entire form.
Yeah, a person named Eli Clare, uh, another whose name I will botch, Leah Lakshmi oh, gonna mess it up. Long name. Uh, S.E. Smith. I don't know. Easy to Google.
Close enough. But yeah, I guess you could talk a little bit more about your background. I mean, did you participate in protests or things like that when you were growing up, or more
uh,
academic?
growing up, no. Uh, I grew up in New York, 60s and 70s. To middle class intellectual parents. Uh, but there was a time when it wasn't very much for them, for us, in terms of a disability awareness in a political sense. There was medical stuff. The Muscular Dystrophy Association, for instance, was, I think, my parents' only source of information, of context, which is unfortunate because that was all about pity uh, and fundraising. Uh, but in the late 70s, began to read in the paper about disability activists. And I guess I thought they were all, you know, radical weirdos or something. Uh, some of them probably were. But uh, when the year I started college, 1980, was the first year that federally funded and uh, institutions, including private colleges with federal tuition grants, had to be accessible. So I was, I was a pioneer, a guinea pig for accessibility efforts. Um,
So yeah, I
I
guess that was after 1977, or after the 504.
exactly the Rehabilitation Act of '73 and Section 504 had this new access standard that went into effect in 1980 after huge protests. Uh, yeah, 4 years earlier to make sure that the standards were enacted. Uh, but yeah, I applied to schools, and one of them said in no uncertain terms, it would be damn difficult. That's a quote for me to attend. And another that told me I was accepted before I even applied. Uh, that became my safety. Uh, so I was pleased to see efforts to make campus more accessible, but it was severely limited. I was not able to integrate well with my fellow students. Uh, and that was a great frustration. Uh, Up until then, well, even then, my parents had always insisted that I go to regular schools. Mainstreaming, it was called. In other words, integrated, not in special ed, but fully integrated in regular schools. So I, had it pretty lucky. When I was a kid, most disabled kids, well, were not educated or very badly educated. Uh, so that was great for me. But when I graduated from college, I suddenly faced a world I hadn't really comprehended before, like a lot of recent college graduates. But in my case, I encountered disability prejudice, for lack of a better word. Uh, I would send out resumes and get invited for job interviews. And then I would show up, and their jaws would drop. We don't really know how to, you know, how you can work here. Uh,
Yeah,
that's when I'm sorry.
as I was going to say, even though you have a Harvard degree, so clearly you're
Yes.
well qualified.
Yeah, I thought I would not have a problem. That's when I began to think, hey, maybe these activists aren't so wild after all. They're onto something. I mean, I don't expect I expect it to be easy, but it's complete. If I did not suspect disability prejudice, it would be foolish. I mean, there's something was going on. Uh, However, one editor here in Los Angeles, where I have stayed, uh, gave me an assignment, a freelance assignment. They don't want me in the office, but my writing samples were pretty good. So I wrote a story for him, and it ran on the front page. And I got more assignments. Uh, it was pretty slim for years and years. Uh, as I say, opportunities for books and articles and essays related to disability are just much more than there used to be. Um, but I still never got a full-time job until last year, almost exactly a year ago. Why? Because of the Zoom revolution. Uh, all of a sudden, it was acceptable for me to work from home with equipment that I had made accessible for myself, a voice recognition computer and a mouse, a mouse I can operate my mouth and whatever, all the help I needed here. I all of a sudden I was employable. Uh, so a kind of fringe benefit of the pandemic, and I really hope that doesn't roll back. I mean, the virtual access to events and to employment opportunities is huge for a lot of disabled folks. Um, so that's kind of the big silver lining I guess you could say. We all
Okay,
like silver linings. Huh?
so we had one question or comment. I'm not sure if he's quite has a question, but Jim Manning is saying that his wife has MS and she's often having issues with her power chairs and accessible van, but they're
Mm,
having a hard time finding and affording help in repairing them.
yeah.
And this is one of her biggest struggles. And he wishes there was a better network of people in Southeast Massachusetts to help with those mechanical troubles. I don't know if you have something like that in Los Angeles or.
Uh, it's always a problem everywhere. Uh,
But he did say, seeing and hearing you move your mouse has given me a good idea to try for her.
well, that's nice. Oh, the last book, as I said, I tried to interview or connect with as many disabled folks as I could. And I realized at one point there's something missing here. And I wrote a chapter that the editor cut out. I tried to sneak in parts of it elsewhere. I did a bit toward the end. Anyway, just regular disabled folks and the stuff that people struggle with. And it's as mundane as that. Getting a wheelchair that is comfortable, affording a van, finding a girlfriend or boyfriend, uh, housing, accessible, affordable housing. They're huge basic issues that, I mean, activists are aware of, but sometimes I think activists get so full of big ideas, and systemic issues can kind of lose touch a little bit. A lot of disabled folks just don't have time or energy to be activists. Although it's part of the disability justice idea too, is that you can be an activist from your bed if you need to be. Thanks to the internet, that is really possible. Um, but yeah, a lot of folks have some pretty basic issues around funding and just getting by day to day. It's it's certainly true. I've thought about this in my own case that money, having funds, financial resources makes a big difference. Can turn a disability into a inconvenience in many cases. Not all. I mean, there are people with chronic pain, and no amount of money will help. There are a lot of autoimmune conditions and things that are, there isn't much out there to help people. Uh, but not having to worry about money, being able to afford the stuff you need, it's a profound difference. Whether it's daily personal care assistance or devices or medicines. Uh, there are huge financial issues that are, again, not just about charity, but about basic fairness.
Yeah,
Hope that makes sense.
I have many friends who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices, and often they've made the point that if I have my wheelchair, then I can actually go to work.
Hmm.
So it's not so much I feel like society owes me something. I'd like to have the
Mm.
support so that I can contribute.
Well, thank you, Jim, for your comment.
Um, oh, okay. He just said that she and I were on our local disability commission for about a dozen years.
Mm.
Um, but maybe writing and communicating like you would be more effective and inspirational.
I
I don't
don't
know.
know. I guess we all hope that the more we get the word out, people will at least understand and more people can make more of an effort. Uh, and they always say the more you can get actual disabled people in positions of authority, in positions of power, maybe the better the odds of having, stuff actually get done that people need.
Um, okay, so does anyone else have any questions? I notice Marilyn and Ralph haven't asked anything. Do you have any questions or thoughts? Feel free to um, put them in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. And in a moment, I can go and check Facebook to see if anyone has any thoughts.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, and I was going to mention to you, Jim. I don't know exactly where you live, and I imagine if you're on the Disability Commission, you may have interacted with them already. But there might be a independent living center out by your way, and that might help at least finding a place that has access to resources and can help you coordinate a little bit. I can't promise anything, but you can go on the website for the State Independent Living Council for Massachusetts, and I think you can find it that way.
I see Marilyn had a question.
Oh, okay, here we go.
You want to read
So
it
yeah,
down?
do you want to read it or
Yeah, you
is it
go
easy?
ahead, please.
Okay.
Disappears on my screen. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I run various free arts and music events. Do you have suggestions on how to improve accessibility?
Well, I hope you stream them. That helps a lot. Uh, so people can, you know, participate or see them, hear them anywhere, anywhere they're comfortable. Uh, I mean, obvious things. If we need sign language interpreters and listening devices, things like that. Uh, if it's on screen, captioning. Uh, I guess that's all sort of obvious basic accessibility stuff. But streaming, live stream entertainment is boy, it seems to top them all. I mean, yeah, if people want to get out, if they can get out and go in person, then yeah, you want to make sure that obviously wheelchair accessible and all that stuff. Uh, but I'm all in favor of more streaming services.
Yeah, I mean, again, Maryland, I think a good way to do that is maybe to ask some local people with disabilities what might make them come. So, again,
Hmm.
another plug for CIL centers. Um, I've been trying to connect with the CIL center out this way a little bit, but having some difficulty because they're not
Uh,
directly talking. But and I think the director's been having some stuff going on, but I can reach out again. I might share the recording of this one.
uh-huh. A lot of places there are transportation issues. Um, I see. Put them on YouTube. Well, that's good. Live streaming is, probably better. Uh, and locations that are on an accessible bus line, if there is one in your area, uh, also a good idea.
Okay, well, Someone has said hello on Facebook. That's not really a question. That's just
Hello
there's,
back, whoever you are.
some eyeballs on it on Facebook, and some people have been sharing it. Um, let's see. Oh, we had another question in the chat. Just Marilyn is saying thank you. Okay, so let's see. I guess we haven't heard from Ralph. I don't know if you had any questions, Ralph. And then I can ask people on Facebook. I'll see if any of them have any questions. And I apologize if the captions aren't the best. I'm using the captions that go with Zoom. There might actually be something better. I should probably explore that a little bit. I think I have a friend in New York who does that for Theater of Breaking Through Barriers. And he's often telling me about searching for good caption services.
Yeah. One big issue I think I haven't really talked about. One of my readers said it's chapter 10, chapter 11 in my book. I forget, but he thought was the big issue is healthcare. Lack of fair access in healthcare. A lot of people are shocked by that. They assume doctors' offices are accessible. They're not. They're supposed to be under the ADA, but they seem to get away with, for instance, you go to a public bathroom, there's an accessible stall with grab bars, supposed to be anyway. How many doctors' offices have grab bars by the examination table? I've never seen one. They ought to. People have difficulty getting themselves up there. I've heard deaf and hard of hearing people complain that there aren't sign language interpreters in medical facilities. They may have, other languages, Spanish or Mandarin or whatever, but not sign language. During the worst of the pandemic, there were, horrible stories about medical rationing and different states having standards whereby, in a crunch, hospitals had to prioritize. And those with certain chronic conditions, people like me, would be at the bottom of the totem pole. We weren't as worth saving as somebody so-called young and healthy. In some cases, there were threats of ventilators being taken away from people who use them every day so that other people who were, again, had a better survival odds could have them. I'm not sure how much of this actually happened. We don't really know. Although we do know about terrible standards in nursing homes and stuff, where a lot of disabled folks, mostly older disabled folks, live or are forced to live.
Yeah, New York had that happen. I remember
Yeah.
reading an article. I think it
Yep.
was in the New York Times or maybe the Seattle Times about one of the first nursing homes that was hit in Washington State that unfortunately set the pattern.
It often the excuse is practicality or liability issues. Um, I while I was writing this chapter, I had an experience. I went to an imaging center for just a routine ultrasound, renal ultrasound, just to check my kidneys. I sat in the waiting room for an hour before I was called up to the front and told, "Oh, we can't take you today." So I've been here for an hour. People have gone in and out. What do you mean you can't take me? Well, if you go to our other facility a few blocks away, you see, I wasn't able to locate a lifting team, strong guys to lift you out of your wheelchair onto the exam table. I said, you don't have to. I brought somebody with me. My regular aide is able to do it. Oh, no, we can't. There's liability issues. I said, well, sign away liability issues. Nope, can't help you. Well, I was mad. I left. Put a bad review on Yelp and all that. I went somewhere else. Got it done, no problem. Uh, Actually, when the Yelp thing went up, they called me and apologized and begged me to take it down. And I said, people ought to know, you know, I wasn't treated right. You could have explained the situation. Uh, yes, perhaps they ought to, by law, supply assistance getting me up on the table. And it's great that they had that idea, but I can still refuse it. You're not forcing me to use it is almost worse than not having it at all. Uh, there was also a story I reported on in the book of uh, a man who went to the hospital during COVID, I believe. Uh, and the doctor says, we're not going to do everything we can for him. It's not worth it. And uh, he basically says, well, he's quadriplegic. So what's the point? The wife, recorded the doctor saying this. It's up on YouTube. And afterwards she said, yeah, maybe it's because we're black. We were treated badly, but I think mostly it was because of my husband's disability. They did not provide him the full measure of care, and he died. Uh, Horrible things happen. Uh, Separate issue of airplane accessibility. That's a long story. Airplanes are exempt from the ADA. They have their own law, their own standard. That's a lot more lax. So, I can go at a city bus, they'll drop a ramp or lift, lock my wheelchair in, no problem. Which, by the way, I never thought I would see growing up. But anyway, it works pretty well, at least in most big cities that I've been to. Not so with airplanes.
There's a lot of
Uh, Sorry?
there's a lot of movements to make airplanes more accessible.
Yes, yes. And there was a
And
woman who died
Ellen,
from
Ellen,
her wheelchair was so damaged that she wasn't able to use it, and it caused her injuries, and she died from them. I mean, these things are not minor. The consequences can be deadly.
um, I have um, I have a friend named Corey Lee who does this YouTube channel, Curb Free with Corey Lee. I think he has a book too, but he does a lot of traveling. And so he also writes about just all the things that you have to do to travel and to try to avoid damage to a wheelchair. And
Mm,
somehow he manages to do it, which is um, impressive. But he sometimes will have comments that are actually a little more uplifting about places where they treated him well.
mm.
They had everything.
Well, there
They
are,
had
yeah,
the
there
chair.
are.
They had the chair waiting for him, and they had people to carry him. And not to say that's the norm, but sometimes it's nice to see that.
That's true. We can get too negative, but then again, people are like, why do I have to be grateful for something, that should be standard, should be the norm, not the exception. Actually, Jim had a comment about his wife in the hospital. Uh, that's also true. It's in my book. Doctors are not trained to deal with folks with chronic disabilities. They don't know what to do. And there's surveys. They have prejudices. They assume a lower quality of life. They assume uh, it's not worth giving disabled people the same level of attention. They don't know what to do. There are disabled people who get turned away, and we have no appointments for not taking new patients once they find out that the person calling uses a wheelchair. Uh, it's a big problem. There are efforts to get medical professionals educated, but that's, it's a far cry from where we ought to be.
Yeah, I have doctors in my family. So I try to at least push them.
Hmm.
Uh, um, and I hear lots of things about bad hospital treatment. I had a friend who they somehow put in the baclofen pump wrong and then refused to admit that it was wrong for months and made a lot of her symptoms worse.
Mm, yeah.
But Pete Buttigieg is supposedly pushing for more accessibility on airlines. I don't know if it will happen, but the guy
Yeah.
has.
He gives a good lip service. We'll see. Uh, one day, it'll happen. Maybe
Yeah.
not in my lifetime.
Uh, okay, let's see. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions? Looks like we do have a lot of people watching on Facebook. They haven't really been asking anything, but if you think of any questions afterwards too, you can send them along, and I'll email Ben with them. Um, as I
I'm
said, I
I'm
will be
pretty I'm pretty easy to get hold of. And go to benmattlin.com, and there's a link there to email me too. I do try to respond to most messages if they're not too nasty.
Yeah, you responded very nicely to me when I reached out on Facebook. Um, so how is accessibility in Los Angeles?
Well, California had some access laws before the ADA. So architecturally, uh, things are pretty good, but Los Angeles. It's a crazy, it's very spread out and very hard to get around. Um, they're building public transit, but it's not really fully realized yet. Um, there is a paratransit access services that, like all of them, people complain they have to wait for hours and hours and schedule in advance, and they're not very reliable. Uh, it it depends what you need and where you are. Um, I have come to expect accessible parking, ramps, things like that, which is nice. Not true in older cities like Boston, New York. Uh, but
Do a lot of those laws come from the 60s and 70s when the activism was starting, or some of them predate that?
I have a bit of my book about this because trying to remember when was the UNRWA law? I think it was in the 50s about discrimination. Uh, but yeah, the access stuff was somewhat later,
Yeah, because
obviously.
I know of Ed Roberts at Berkeley and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
I mean,
Sorry to name drop people, but you should read up about Ed Roberts and watch the Quip Camp documentary. I think that was very good.
uh-huh,
Read
uh-huh.
read Judy Human's book. I loved it. You
Yeah,
have to come
yeah.
out here to read it.
There were a lot of great activists in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my understanding is, it's a pretty accessible place. Uh, but here in LA, God, if I try to walk up the street to my local post office, whatever, it's a slog. They don't keep up the sidewalks. People don't walk in LA. Uh, so it is a little hard to get around. There are, overgrown tree roots cutting up the sidewalk, and uh, sometimes I miss the big flat sidewalks in more pedestrian friendly places. Um, and again, I never liked cobblestones much. Pretty bumpy for a wheelchair user.
I think people have told me there's not shock absorbers in most wheelchairs.
Right, right.
You feel everything.
Uh, True.
Um, yeah, I was just wondering. I realized I didn't know a lot about the accessibility laws in California apart from what I'd read about in the movement in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard some things about LA having issues, though mostly that was from Shane Burkhar's podcast, where I think they spent about a year in
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles or something, and they were just talking about different things that they ran into with no transportation and weird traffic laws.
Yeah,
They
yeah, of course. He's been
they
living
had
in
to park their
Minneapolis. Probably no
they had to park
comparison.
their car, they had
Sorry?
to park their car they had to park their car backwards so that they could get the ramp out
Oh, I missed that one.
because it's
Okay.
only on one side, and they were told they couldn't do that, and they got a fine.
Yeah, I've had that too. I've had that too. Some of the garages have strange rules. Why can't you park backward?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Sometimes
No, no,
I
I think I interrupted you.
um all right. So um I we I'll see if anyone else has any questions, and we don't have to go till 5 if you don't want to. Um, I feel like we've had a pretty extensive conversation. Um, I will check Facebook to see if anyone has any thoughts or questions.
Well, as I said, anybody who wants to hit me up later, I'm open.
Yes, I can share Ben's email, and he's very findable on Facebook. Um, that's how I got in touch with him at first. And I don't know if you have the other um, social media platforms, but
Oh, I use Twitter, or should I say X. I'm on Instagram, but I don't use it very often.
Oh, okay. I just got it. So does anyone have any questions? Um, all right. So I guess we can just make some closing statements then.
Oh,
Did you have any? Oh, wait. Sorry. There are some things in the chat. Marilyn says, thank you for the discussion. I look forward to reading your book.
good.
Jim says he'll check out benmattlin.com. And Ralph says, you are very inspirational. Thanks for all you do. Yeah, I don't think there's any more comments.
Well, thank you all for joining in and listening and, for your interest by, by my book, by other people's books. And because the more the publishers, the gatekeepers of media realize that there is interest, there is a market, yeah, better for all of us.
All right, so I will share the recording with all of you later. It usually takes a little while to process the recording, so once that's done, I'll share it with all of you. And I might edit out some of just the waffling at the beginning while we're waiting for people to join. And hopefully, some of you who are having sound issues or didn't catch the whole thing, you can see it on the recording. It'll also be on the library YouTube page.